Thank you for coming to my talk. So this is primarily a developer kind of perspective of Entity Framework debugging. I'm sure I'm going to have lots of feedback when I go through some of the SQL Server tools, so please speak up. I am not a SQL Server DBA. I do have a slide that says that in here too. So silence, cell phones, naturally. There's lots of ways to explore all that PASS has to offer. I am on the board of PASS. I'm the token developer on the board. They keep me around because we want to grow PASS and we want to have more learning, especially in the developer side, data developers. So this is a great opportunity coming up. So my name's Chris Woodruff. I'm from Grand Rapids, Michigan, but I do work for Quicken Loans, which is in downtown Detroit, Michigan. And some of my contact information is down there if you want to get a hold of me, and I'll show my email at the end. We are looking to hire people at Quicken Loans. So if anyone is looking for a job, we do remote, and we do have offices in Charlotte, North Carolina, Phoenix, Cleveland, and Detroit. So, okay, so Nate isn't here. So my story is about 4 or 5 years ago, I worked on a project, and we were designing some software for charter schools. And we had some great DBAs. And Nate, who was in my talk yesterday, if anyone was in there, and I talked about him a lot, he was always coming up to us and saying, hey, I'm finding this query is really slow, and it's not the most efficient query that you could write. And so we were like, so where is it? And he's like, well, all I know is that here's the query. I don't know where it's coming from. So can we find where it's coming from, and then we can fix it in the code? And that gave me this perspective. As a software developer, most of us go run, we get data back, it shows up in our app somehow, or we throw it out of an API, and then we walk away. We go, well, I got data. It should be good enough. But that's not really what we should be doing. We should be, as developers, using all of the tools that are at our disposal. And those tools include the Microsoft tools and the like SQL Server Management Studio, and a lot of these vendors out here have tools that will tell us when we're having unoptimized queries and queries that don't run well, or databases that are not created well. So I know I've worked on big projects that didn't have DBAs, and I had to do it myself. So I didn't really know at that point what a well-defined database meant, how to create the right indexes, and the right relationships between tables, and also tune the SQL engine the right way. So, and a lot of developers are like me, so I thought, let's dig in. I want to do a talk where I can get people. I'm not going to teach people how to use these tools, but I can get them interested to then go back home or back to the office and learn more about them. So we'll go through some of that. So like I said, I'm not a DBA. I have had to act like a DBA in the past, but I am not a DBA, and I'm not a traditional SQL like a database developer per se. I do kind of like databases, and I love data, so I try to learn as much as I can. And then usually this talk is at developer conferences. So I always say we're not here to attack the DBA, because I don't want that. I want everyone to work together, because if developers and DBAs can work together, we can have great solutions. So what are we trying to solve? So this is the big thing I want to take a look at today. So the goals for this talk are really to better use the tools for SQL Server. I want to get better use for Entity Framework Core, for performance, and to make our users happy. And then the last one is, as a developer, I want to have all my developers I work with have better relationships with their DBAs. And that's a goal of this talk. So hopefully in 70 minutes, we can kind of get through all this. And please ask questions, so raise your hand. If I didn't see you, just yell out to me, I have a question. So I don't really want to talk this whole time. I want to have a conversation. It should be both ways. So the first thing I always get developers doing is understanding query plans. Now, I'm not going to dig deep into query plans because most developers, to be honest, haven't even looked at a query plan. Or if they have, they don't really understand what it is. So I always say, here's a query that I run from one of my applications. This actually came from a Entity Framework core LINQ statement. And you can see it has lots of inner joins, and down below is the query plan. And this is, I don't think I have any issues with this query plan. I can see, and if I zoom in, if you zoom in, you can see which subquery or which sub kind of section uses the most resources. See, I'm not a DBA. I don't even have the right terminology. So I don't even know how to talk the DBA talk. So you just have to bear with me on this one. So, but I have this query, which comes from another database. So this is a database that I have that contains all baseball stats from 1873 till last year. So I am good enough to be able to take all this data and create a baseball database with it. If anyone wants this database, come talk to me afterwards. It's freely available, and you can have it, and I'll show you where you can find it. But this query is, well, can anyone tell me what you think this query is? Yeah, well, nope. So it's something to do with the World Series in 2018. But can you tell me a little bit more? It's something specific about the World Series in 2018. Pitchers. What side? What? The winning? Yes. This is a query to find the pitchers on the winning team of the 2018 World Series. And when I get all the data for this year, I'll update it to 2019. But anyone remember who won the World Series? Not a couple weeks ago, but the previous season? No. Red Sox. So it sounds like we have some Boston fans in here. But yeah, the previous year was the Astros. So, and anyone know who just won the World Series? Nats. Cool. So, okay. So yeah. So this query goes out to my baseball stats database and gets the winning pitchers from the Boston Red Sox team that won the World Series. So I ran this. I took a look at the query plan, and there's an issue, right? Is there an issue with this query plan? I know it's kind of small, the text is small, but there's a issue with this query plan. So this query plan says that there's a missing index. So if I build an application, which I did on top of this database, and if I never went in and took a look at these queries, I wouldn't know that there was a missing index in this database. As a developer, I got the data right. I got the data. I got it back out. But if I actually build a real application that would get millions of users hitting this database, I wouldn't be effectively getting the data out of the database. Now this query is caused by this, and anyone, what's the terminology? How should I say this? Is it a subquery? Is it a what? An operator. Okay, thank you. I mean, there's enough DBAs in here. They can teach me something. So this operator took 85% of the operation of this query to perform. So I think that's kind of a big hit. So if I took a look at this and gave the wording, it even gives me the SQL statement to create the index on this table. So not only did it tell me I have a missing index, the query plan, SQL Server will even tell me what to run to create that index. So I don't even want developers to go in and know any more than this. I just really want them to go in and take a look at as many of their queries as possible in SQL Server, and then see which ones are running well, or see which ones just have some issues, because you might find that you can really dramatically increase the performance of your database. Okay, the other thing that I found is useful is this client statistics. So I ran this. It's the same query as the good query that I showed a little earlier. And if you want to when you run this, if you want to take a look at the query statistics, there's a button in SSMS that you can select to show with the query plan the client statistics. Or if you're a shortcut person, you can just do a Shift Alt S. And what that will show is these statistics for this query. Now the nice thing is, if I run this query a number of times, it will actually tell me each one. It will get statistics for each one. It'll call them each trials, and it will tell me some information about them. So I use this also so I can see how long it takes for these queries to run, and other information, the number of transactions or the number of server round trips that I have. Maybe I have something going on that's causing multiple trips to the server. I just really kind of want to know what's going on with these queries. So as a DBA, I do have a question, because since I have so many DBAs in here, from these tools that you have in SQL Server, what do you think developers should take a look at? Do you have things that you've told your developers to use, or do you just tell them to stay out of your databases and not take a look at them?
So I usually prefer extended event sessions that are running in development. And that way, when they are debugging, they can see the collected
Yeah.
metrics.
And I have that coming up. So,
That way they
yep.
don't have to go through all the hustle of capturing the query themselves. They just query the extended event session.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. So I do talk about extended events in here in a few slides later. So awesome. Anyone else? Yeah.
So I am a developer and part of DBA.
Okay.
The tool that I use is Query Store. I think it's 2016.
Yep. And I'm going to show Query Store also. So cool. You guys kind of reinforcing that I'm at least going down the right path. So the next tip I give people is this idea of extended events, but there's also this idea, and I see people are leaving, and before you have okay. Okay, fellow board member, I can live with that. So query tags. So how many DBAs have found queries that take forever, aren't optimized, just are crummy queries, and then you kind of you copy them, you send your developer an email or some kind of message and say, hey, this query is really bad. Do you know where this query is? And the developer will say, I don't know, but I'll try to find it. How many people have that experience? Okay, how would you like to solve that Monday when you go back to the office? Okay, so query tags is a way for your developers in their LINQ statements to add. Now this is Entity Framework Core, it's not Entity Framework 6. They can add these methods to their LINQ statements, tag with, and then they give a string. And these strings will be tagged onto the query that gets sent back across the wire back to SQL Server. And I see people are taking pictures, so I'll wait till everyone's done, because this is what you will see when you go into your logs or you take a look at that query, at the raw query that came over from the application side. So those tags get sent over as comments. And so I'm going to go back to what we were looking at before. So for me, on every LINQ statement that I write in my code, I have 3 tag widths. I have a description, I have a query location, so I fully namespace where this LINQ statement is being called and was it or is in my code. So in this case, it's in Chinook, so that's the project or the start of the namespace. Then it's in controllers, then it's part of the album controller, then it's the index action. So this is an MVC application. And you can see that. And then if there's any parameters that get put in, I'm gonna give a name of the parameters that are sent over with this LINQ statement. But since there is no parameters in here, I just say none. So you will see that in the logs, and I've also seen it when I go into extended events. So in extended events, you should see that when extended events finds whatever those events are set up to fire and identify whatever queries constraints. Yeah, I've even seen them show up when you take a look at in the query store. So, what's that? So if those tools, so he's asking if they show up in performance monitoring tools. They should, because those tools just go along and they work with all the information that SQL Server, the engine, is dealing with, and the logs and everything. So it just shows up as a comment. Yep. Yeah, yep. So if you wrote this in as a query in just whatever tool, data grip or SSMS, it's just like if you wrote comments coming across and sent them over to whatever SQL Server that instance that you're working with. But in this case, they're actually going to be coming over from the application itself. So I had someone yesterday come up to me after my talk yesterday and said, just this was enough value for him coming to Pass Summit so he could go back and tell all of his application developers about query tags, because he had so many issues with well, someone else told me that too. So, but Joe told me also. So, but I mean, I wish we had this 10 years ago, because it would have saved me a lot of time, because I wouldn't have had my DBAs be grumpy, because every time they worked with me, I would have to say, I don't know, and I'll look into it and find it. But if they came in and said, look, this query is located in this namespace, bang, we're right in there, we're looking at it, and we're saving lots of time. Okay. Not that I know of. Nope. You just have to write them by hand. So.
I'd suggest another type of version of query.
Well, you could create a new type of query that would add those automatically to them. The one thing that you can't do, so if we take a look back at these strings cannot be used C#6 string interpolation with them. So they're just static strings. So I can't create them on the fly at runtime in my application. I wish I could. The Entity Framework core team is looking into this, so that if I had a parameter, I could insert the value of the parameter that I was sending over. It would insert that into that tag width string and send it on through. But at this point, all we have are static strings. Yes. No. Since 2.2, yes. Yeah, it's not, this feature is only EF Core and not EF6. So if no one knows, actually EF6 is not getting any more features. It will be bug fixed. It will have security holes plugged if any are discovered. But primarily, the whole .NET framework code base is, in all knowledge that I have, is basically not being worked on, not being updated with any new features. EF Core and all .NET Core will be where all new features will be added to .NET. So, and that's basically because next year .NET 5 will replace both .NET Core and .NET Framework going forward. Yes?
What about when you talk about setting application name in the connection string?
Yeah, I don't talk about that here, but that is a good feature. I'll think about adding it in the future. I don't have it here. So in the connection string, you can set your application name, and that will also be sent over to SQL Server. So you can at least identify what application queries are coming from. But if you use these tag widths, they should pretty much tell you exactly application and where within the application that they're coming from. Okay, so I also go through extended events, and DBAs, everyone knows extended events, correct? So I'm not going to really go into this too much, because for a developer, so extended events are these kind of for the few developers in here who don't know this stuff, you can set up these extended events so that if certain criteria are met based on any type of SQL statement, that you can get flagged and you get notified for these. So in this case, I basically are just checking for queries, statements are they're completed, and I just say, find me anything that starts with a select album. And it'll find any query and log those queries into this event log. So it's a good way to also catch certain things you can catch if queries take too long, or if they take too much, or if they consume too much memory. You can set these extended events up to flag those. Okay, so query store. Who doesn't know about the query store? One person doesn't know about the query store. Okay, so you know what? And if one person doesn't know about it, that person should. So the query store is, for me, and I'm just saying from a developer who has looked into this, the query store is kind of like a front end to all of the cryptic knowledge that these DBAs in here have had for a long time, at least in my view. So there's this whole part, and this only came in SQL Server 2016, and by default, it's actually turned off for databases because it does have a small impact on databases. I want to say I've heard 2 to 4%. Is that what people around that? It's about 2 to 4% impact on databases that it's running in. So let's dig in, and I will actually bring up the query store. And don't hate me because I don't know everything about query store. So if I say something wrong, please correct me, because I want to learn. So for me, I always go into the overall resource consumption report. So this at least will give me like execution count, duration, CPU time, and logical reads. Where do most DBAs start out when they go into the query store for the first time? At each, so which one over here? Top resource consuming queries. Okay. So for this, I only have one query, so it's kind of boring. So, but in here you can really dig down. So if I'm in here and if I see duration, I can actually, like.
Chris, go back to that screen for a moment.
Yes, sure.
No, the first one, the top resource.
Yep.
Go up to where it says duration max. You hit the drop down. No, right where you were. Right where you were.
Right here.
There you go. You go CPU or however you want it.
Okay.
So it pulls it up
Awesome.
on what you're looking for.
Okay. And then you can do max, min, average. So in here, if I hover in here, I can see what those queries were. Like this one looks to be an internal query, but this one also is an internal query. So let's see if I can find one that actually is one that actually I ran against the database. See,
Go up to the grid view. So go to right. No, go back to where you were. Same thing. Go over right over one.
this, and you can see all of them.
You can see the
Good.
queries better there.
Okay. Okay.
The actual bar.
Oh, this is awesome. Good. So,
And it's
thank you.
by the worst one.
Yeah, the total CPU time. Okay. Cool. Yeah, so how I kind of would use it is I would come in here and take a look, and if I saw something that didn't look right, I would just double click on it, and it would, like for this, it would come up with top resource consumers. And then in here I could kind of identify which ones, like this one. So here's one that I actually wrote, I actually did, but let's take a look, and right there. So, so this one is a one that I wrote, and I can come in here and see the query plan for it. So for me as a developer, I'm not doing the same thing that you DBAs are. I'm only trying to identify and really come in and try to identify those ones that are obviously wrong, and at least for me, the query store works well with that. So I may not be using it as effectively as
Before you go out,
yeah,
hover on that dot on the left. There.
yeah,
That also tells you like how many times it ran per second and everything.
yep,
So
execution count.
that's important from the standpoint of your query may not be a long running query. Your query may be one that is actually running hundreds of times a second.
Yeah,
That could be causing the issue.
yeah, cool.
So be aware of that.
The dot is bigger in size if it's more executions.
Okay,
You can actually see it graphically.
cool. Well, thank you. Awesome. Okay, so I hope that one person in the back got some insight. I did. So thank you. I appreciate you helping me out and helping everyone else. So for the one person back there, if you do want to turn this on for your databases, you can right-click on the database in SSMS, and you can turn it on that way, or you can come in and do an alter database and turn it on and off through this feature. So, yeah.
Development perspective, something that is probably important is that it's materialized. So it's saved in the database when you do your restore over into your development system.
Okay.
You've got your production query information in there.
Okay.
You can give your developers
Oh.
access to it in development, and they can see their production data without giving them access to.
Oh, awesome. That's good to know. Okay. I'll build that into the next version of this talk that I do. So, yes.
And from a DBA point of view, don't turn it on without speaking to the DBA.
So that is true. I would never turn it. I mean, I'm only turning it on for local, like I'm running this locally. But yes, I would never turn it on a database that I actually don't have permission to do. So yeah.
If you don't have a DBA in your shop and you want to turn it on, check Aaron Stellado's slide deck on it.
Okay.
She gives you some very good parameters of what to set up.
Oh, okay.
If you want to set up like, for example, maybe only retain the data for 30 days. Or
Yeah.
whatever the case may be.
Okay. Good. I'll look up her slide deck after this. She had a talk at this summit.
She had a pre-con.
A pre-con. Okay. Okay. Awesome. I will take a look at that. Thank you. Okay. So now I'm going to get on my soapbox. So I know DBAs have this bad taste in their mouth when they hear ORM, but really ORM isn't a bad thing if it's used responsibly. Too many developers use ORMs as an OOM, which is an object-oriented modeling. So we'll dig in and I'll kind of explain maybe and give you guys some evidence or some ammunition to go back. That's kind of a strong word, ammunition. Some evidence to go back to your development teams, and so when you have discussions on this stuff. So there's lots of ways to use Entity Framework and Entity Framework Core. The original way that when it was like EF 1 and 2 was we would have our databases, we would generate what we called a entity data model off of those databases, and that would be in a file that would have an extension on there called EDMX. And it was just an XML file that fully described the database and metadata for the database, and then that would interact with code that we would write to interact with the database through the earlier versions of Entity Framework. So later, and this is how I use Entity Framework Core and Entity Framework 6 if I still use it. I have a predefined database that's already been vetted, it's been developed, it's well indexed, everything for the most part is set to go with it. I generate my code based on that database. So I use what's called DB Context Scaffolding. That is a command in the Entity Framework Core CLI, and it gives me all the code that I need to interact with the database. Some developers will do code first. And what code first is, they write all their code, they write all their entity models, which are just C# classes, and they write a DB context that also describes as much of the database as they can think about, and they use that, and they use this thing called Entity First or Entity Framework Core Code First migrations. Anyone heard of migrations? Okay, migrations are horrible. Microsoft should never have created that, because they created it because it was nice to demo, and they thought it would be cool to do. It has been, and if they were in here, they would say, no, it's fine, it's great. No one should make databases other than this way, but they are horrible. So I always tell people, if any of your development team even says Entity Framework migrations, you try to fight them and you tell them not to use that technology. Because what they're doing is they're really taking the power out of your hands. They are going to generate a database, and they're going to update it with, if they change something in the code, add a new property to an entity model, or change something, it will update the database. But I have seen so many horrible databases used, they're created and used with this type of Entity Framework methodology. I've seen databases with the only indexes that are on the table is on the primary key column. I've seen databases that are just horribly, the schemas are horrible and they don't make any sense. Well, they won't have circular references because C# and .NET won't allow for circular references. It'll actually come up with a compiler error if it has. Who asked that? Yeah, so it will come up and give you a compilation error for circular reference. So you take my email, take my contact information. If a team is trying to convince you that they know how to do code first migrations the right way, have them talk to me, because it is not the right way to do it. The only way to do it is the middle, where you have an existing database that drives your code. So, okay, now I'm going to get off my soapbox for right now, and we will get back into it. So, any feedback up to now? No? Okay, so hopefully, yeah. So DB, it means really database and code for, it means if you ever look it up, it's really database first, code first is the technical name. I just call it DB code first because I'm using an existing database to create my code. Now, code first just means that I'm not working with this EDMX file that I don't really have. I have a database and I have my code, and that's it. So, yep. So the other thing that that we have to teach developers about is how they really use Entity Framework Core the right way. So this comes in, yes? Sure. So yes, so DB code first, what I call DB code first is when you scaffold. So in EF6, where there's a wizard that will do the scaffolding for you. In Entity Framework Core, there is no wizard in Visual Studio. You have to actually run a command inside the terminal, either outside or within Visual Studio. And it's a command line, and there's some options that you run with it. So, yeah, thank you for that question. So transactions. So most developers don't really understand what's going on inside Entity Framework Core in regards to transactions. So I've got this code segment here. And what the developer who wrote this was thinking was, you know what, since DBAs do this, they have these SQL scripts, and they wrap the SQL scripts with a begin and end transaction. You know what, I guess I'm going to do the same thing in my code. So they do this using. So using just means that I'm gonna use this whatever's in here for the entire segment of code that's wrapped in these curly brackets. So it's using a transaction that it was got created. This database, think of this database context. That's actually called a DB context in Entity Framework terminology. But think of that class, when it's an instance of that class, is just the connection to the database. So in here, I'm going to come in and say, from the database, go out to the user. In the developer speak, it is go out to the user, bless you, go out to the user entities and find me a user with a primary key of 1. And then it's going to find another one with a primary key of 2. So now we have user A and user B. We're going to come in and say user A name equals admin, and then we're going to do a save changes. We're going to save the update and change the age of user B to 28 and save changes. And then we're going to come in at the end, and we're going to say transaction complete. And this developer is like, you know what? I'm the greatest developer in the world. I'm so smart because I wrapped this whole thing in a transaction. But really, they did something quite wrong. They broke a pattern. So they broke the repository pattern and the work of unit pattern. And they also don't understand how Entity Framework Core works in regards to save changes. And we'll take a look at that in the next code. So then this is the correct way to do it. So what this will do is, what they should understand is whenever you call save changes, that DB context is sitting and getting all of its, whatever changes that instance of the DB context is collecting, those will be queued up. And those will, when you call save changes, those will actually be wrapped in a transaction behind the scenes. And if anything fails within any of those updates, the whole transaction behind the scenes, that whole queue will roll back. So you don't need to do transactions when you're working with your DB contexts and your inside or with Entity Framework Core. So if you see these developers who are using transactions and they think that they have to wrap these transactions up, they're doing it wrong. Plus, they're kind of breaking they're having an anti-pattern. We'll take a look at what that anti-pattern is in a little while in this talk. Okay, so we're going to get into these anti-patterns. Let's take a look at those. Abstraction too far. And this isn't really the developer. This is more about the architect or maybe a developer lead or a senior developer. They try to abstract things way too much. So as you can see, the little cartoon, they kept abstracting and creating more and more things until they ran out of ideas how to name them, so they just named them after the architect that created them. So try not to abstract too much. The more layers that you put into your systems, the more latency you're going to get. So I try to do more of a flat. And for people that are taking pictures, this slide deck will be out on the talk. I actually sent them this morning this updated slide deck. So it will be out on the PASS Summit site for this talk. But try not to abstract too much. So I think sometimes developers and architects try to get too fancy and do too much of this. So inappropriate usage scenarios. So I've seen this one quite a bit. I will say Entity Framework Core is not good at bulk process. It wasn't made for bulk updates, and it wasn't made to push a ton of updates or just update any or just bulk commands over to the other side. It wasn't really made for that. So don't try to use it for scenarios that it wasn't really meant to do. It was really meant for single calls to the database to do some kind of CRUD calls on an entity that is within its DB context. So ineffective fetching strategies. So, this one is just, you got to think about, and it kind of goes back to that transactions. Think about how, and you have to understand really, you got to dig into Entity Framework Core to understand how it's being used so you can use it effectively. So it's just understand the tool well. So tight coupling. So this comes down to like architecture, and I do an architecture talk around ASP.NET Web API where I talk about decoupling stuff. So in my architecture, I talk about, I build my architecture so I can quickly substitute different data access projects within my projects and within my solutions. So if I want to do any framework core over here, I can. If I want to use Dapper, which is another ORM, I can. And I can switch those out very, very quickly. Never couple your technologies together. If you couple them together, one, they're going to be hard to test, to unit test or just test in general. And two, if you ever have to make a change in the future, you're going to have a lot more effort to change out those technologies. Any questions at this point? You don't need to use transactions with Entity Framework Core. So you shouldn't have, and it's probably an upcoming anti-pattern, you shouldn't have DB contexts that live a long time that do a bunch of stuff. You should get it, do something, one small unit of work, and then give it back, and then get another one to do something else. It's the way that Entity Framework Core was really made to be used. Yeah, so the question is, what would you use, what do you use, or I use to bulk updates or bulk processing? I don't really have anything off the top of my head. I just wouldn't use Entity Framework Core to do that. I would use something else, or if you had to, you could dig down, straight down to what we call ADO.NET, which is really more down on the iron. But there's probably a lot better .NET libraries to do bulk updates.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of ways you can do this. You have the ability to execute sort of procedures through Entity Framework.
Yep, and I'll show you how to do that.
The other thought is, it's not that you're not using a transaction with any framework. It's that by wrapping it in a unit of work pattern, and I think there's a good example of how to do that in Microsoft Docs. You're simply handling your transaction all in code, not database level, so it's all going to succeed or fail at once when you close out that unit of work.
Yeah, but I almost take a step back, and I try not even to have multiple discrete pieces of SQL updates or commands. I try to do one command and then only use that DB context for that one thing. I wrap it in a repository, and so if I want to delete something, I delete it. If I want to update something, I just update it. I don't go through a whole ton of different changes and then run those at the end. So it's just the way that for me a good architecture would run, and most good developers and most good .NET people would probably also adhere to that also. So clashing DB context, this is what I'm talking about. If you have all these DB contexts in your application that exist for a long time, they can actually kind of start hitting the same data possibly that you're working with, and cause concurrency issues in your code. So my whole thing is use these DB contexts as short as you can. So if I use them pretty much for one single unit of work, and then I let them go back into the DI container within .NET Core and grab it again if I need it for another unit of work. And then stateful services. You know what? I like to have all of my applications. Mostly I build APIs. So I'll use APIs that all my applications will hit to get data, to work with data, or the information that my application uses. And all of those services I'm building are stateless. So try not to build stateful services into your application. One, they're really hard to keep the state. And as people who used to do WinForms know, there's a lot of baggage that comes with trying to keep state back in the services. So those are some of the anti-patterns that I work with. Now, let's take a look at Entity Framework Core and LINQ. So if LINQ is just the way that we in the C# and .NET world will write our queries. So here's some code that I've written. So I can just look at it from here. So it's a little application that basically creates a DB context. So I now have the context variable is a connection to my database. I have a variable called students with same name, and that is just going through the context and going into the student entity type. And I'm just doing a where clause to say, give me all the students where the first name is the return variable for the getName function, which will return Chris, and then whatever students come out, make that a list, and then I'm gonna be able to use that in my application somehow. Now, if I run this and take a look at the SQL, the select statement that gets sent over to the database, it looks something like this. So it's actually sending over an exec sp_exec SQL, and it will include the select statement that Entity Framework Core created for this LINQ statement, and it will insert a variable into there. It's that _getName_0. It will create that variable as a nvarchar 4000, and then it will set that variable with Chris as a string that gets sent over, and then it will say go, and it will send it across the wire. So yesterday, as Joe over here can attest, we did have a nice discussion because we had some developers and some DBAs that were asking, like, they don't like that. They don't like having to see these nvarchar 4000s coming across. They're big, and how do we get rid of them? So actually last night I did research it, and why I put in this slide deck is I wanted to show people how not to send over those large nvarchar 4000s. So there's two ways to do it. In your code, inside your entity types, which are just C# C# classes, in the properties. So this is the property for a student, the student class. We have a first name. I can set the column to a type name of varchar, and I can also set that property as a string length 250. So instead of nvarchar 4000 being sent over, it will send over in the query. If I go back here, instead of this, it will be sent over as a varchar 250. So the other way you can do it is to go down in the model builder, where this is code within the DB context. And this is actually the way that I would prefer it, because I'm not a big fan of annotating or decorating the entity models. I like having everything in the same file. So I would do it this way. When I was creating this, instead of my entity, I could call this student, but it would just create this and set the first name property to be a varchar 250. So so if you have, yeah. Yeah, but I really like it done here and I really like it to be done in the DB context because, I have all of my database information in that, all the relationships and all the constraints that were discovered coming back from the database. I just throw it in here because to keep all that business logic, or in this case, database logic, in one place. But I haven't really dug into how to do it in the fluent language, but you could probably do it. So, what's that?
The bottom one isn't fluent style.
Yeah, that's a fluent style, but that's actually code that's within the DB context. Oh, you do? Okay. So, yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it won't. Sometimes it won't bring them over and bring over the exact like the. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. So I've seen it where sometimes it will, but I just am of a habit. I go in there and make sure no matter what. Now it won't bring over the. I haven't seen it bring over the column type. So if you have an int and you want it to be an int 16 or a larger int, or if you have an int but you want it to be a bit, or if you want it to be something other than what Entity Framework Core thinks is an int, then I would go in and change the column types. So, yes.
The other thing to let developers know is on bar chart max, try to stay away from it because you can't index it.
Yeah.
You're going to do a tablespoon or something.
Yeah. Yep. So the comment was, one is just don't use varchar max in your databases. So, yep, because you won't be able to index on those. We'll have to do scan. Those will do table scans. Okay. So, yeah, go ahead. Okay. Okay.
When you do that change in model builder, when you regenerate the model from the database, like update model from database.
Yep. It will overwrite it.
It will override this. So we would suggest to all the overwriting, the manual overwriting to, because the classes are partial.
Yep.
To create your own partial
Thank you.
classes. So it's like my experience when I want to change in the model to not lose any regeneration.
Yep.
Just keep in mind if you do new properties or you delete
Yes.
new properties, you need to delete a new
Yes.
partial code. So you create partial class exactly the same model.
Exactly.
And keep this in a different place.
Yep. So to restate, because we're recording this for people that are going to listen to it later, if you're going to do either one of these, and you regenerate your database using the scaffolding at some later point, you will lose all this code because it will regenerate a new file on top of the DB context and on top of the entity types that are generated based on the database. So as the developer said, are you a developer or a DBA or both? Both. So as the developer / DBA has said, use partial classes. So that just means a partial class in C# is a way to split and have the same class across two distinct files. And so you can put your user-defined stuff into a partial class that will not be overridden at some point in the future when you regenerate these files. So thank you.
Entity Framework force that length. So you've got a length of 250 and you're trying to put a string in that is 300.
Yes, it will. At runtime, it will generate an exception. So if I go in and try to do an update, and I try to update a string and take it beyond the limit, or doing a insert, it will come back with an error, and it will.
Does it come back from SQL or does it?
It comes back from. It will come back from Entity Framework Core now.
I've actually kind of the opposite.
Oh, okay.
We had the unit tests written that were put in strings that were too long using SQLite. There was no errors coming back, and we ran in production using SQL Server, and the error was coming from SQL Server. So we actually had to write a little method to go into the model dynamically and say what's the length to make sure it's not making it too long. This is the Entity Framework Core 3.
Okay. 2.2. Okay, that's interesting because if you write these declarations, the annotations on your entity types, those will, and maybe you're not doing validation in allowing the whatever application. Yeah, maybe validation isn't turned on, but it should. It should be on by default, but just you'll have to take a look at your application. So the other thing that I do is I use there's a third-party validation library called Fluent Validation that I set up, and I have all of my validation rules in one class, or a class for each entity type, so that they're kept out of anything that could be overridden by code generation. So, but if you take a look, it's a new Get package. Just take a look for Fluent Validation, and all the code is open sourced out on GitHub. Okay, so we are starting to run out of time. So let's dig into how to improve EF queries. So we have this way to do string interpolation in raw SQL methods. So I can write this code that says, I have a variable called city, it's a string. I create a new DB context, and I use that, and I can say context.customers.from SQL, and then I'm going to send in this string. In this string, I know from DBA's select star shouldn't be used, but in my defense, these from queries always have to be the same shape as a customer. So so if I did select star or select every single column from the customer table, that I would have to do either one of those, because I can't have less than the entire shape of my customer entity class coming back. So it's a little thing that you have to do. So, but that's neither here nor there. I just got some flack yesterday from doing select star. So if I run this, I can actually run this, and what Entity Framework will do is it will take this string, create a new parameter for this value that I'm using string interpolation for, and then send that across wire. So it actually will be sent over like that with the parameter P0 filled in. That will be sent over. So we're not having SQL injection in this. And yes, SQL Server will actually take a look at what is coming over in this parameter, and I'm not saying it won't be. You can't have bad things happen with this, because you can always have bad things happen, but we're not sending an entire string over that can cause issues with the SQL Server. And I should be checking and making sure that whatever is being said in that P0 is correct, which in this case it is. It's going to be set to a city. So if there's any developers in here, this is using the capabilities of C#6, and how we're using that is in C#6, there was a new variable type, string type called formatable string. And you can see on my second example how we can use, instead of directly calling that string inside from SQL, we can set up a formatable string with that same string value with the SQL statement, and then send that into from SQL, and it will run the same way. So that's kind of the background of how we're using string interpolation in raw SQL methods, which doesn't roll off the tongue, but it's still one of my favorite features of EF Core. And this was EF Core 2.1. So with this, we can now call stored procedures, which was kind of difficult to do in EF, the original EF and earlier versions of EF core. So stored procedures are still technically not supported in EF core, but we can use raw SQL to do those calls. So in this case, I do have a call to get students, and then I'm going to send in a name like Bill, and I'm going to get a list back. So we can do something like this, or we can do it where we can set it up so Bill can be part of the from SQL itself. So there's two ways that you can do this. So that's kind of a nice way to handle. You can also use views with this. You can do tables without primary keys, but we also have ability to work with those, and I'll take a look at those in a second. But explicitly compiled queries, these are nice. So as a DBA, this won't affect your world at all, but for the developers, if I have a loop and I have a LINQ statement inside that loop that's calling data, that's going to get back data from the database, and I run it 1 million times in that loop, how many times do I compile that LINQ statement? Every time. I JIT that LINQ statement 1 million times. What if I could create a already compiled query that I could use inside that loop 1 million times and only have it compile once? It will give me a very more efficient application. So this is a call to do a delegate. So I'm creating basically a new function pointer, and that's called _query get all albums. And inside that, I'm calling it to call the EF. So EF is just a library. I'm calling the EF compile async query. And inside that compile async query, I'm giving the LINQ statement that I want. In this case, it's just saying, go through the DB context out to the album out to the album entity type and give me back all the albums. And I can call that later in my code because that top was compiled once, and I can now call that later in my code to get back all the albums that I want back from the database. So this will give me about between 15 and 20% performance gains depending on the scenario that I'm using these compiled queries and non-compiled queries and these LINQ statements. So this is a big boost. I use this in all of my APIs that I develop using ASP.NET Core API. The other thing that I find really valuable that most developers don't know about is this thing called DB context pooling. So for the DBAs out there, who knows about dependency injection? Who's heard of that? So some. So it's kind of it's a feature that's been around for a while, but it wasn't built into .NET Framework. In .NET Core, they did insert this capability into .NET Core. It's the ability to say, I have this container. I want all these objects inside of the container. And when someone wants one of them, they can just go inside the container and call it, and it will give them one. But for DB context, say I'm running this through MVC actions, every time it wants a new DB context from the dependency injection container, it actually has to create that object and then send that out to the calling code. So if I run it 3 times, I get 3 instances of it. If I call it 1 million times, I get 1 million instances of the DB context coming out of the DI container. With DB context pooling, I actually, in the beginning, get a pool of these DB contexts that get created that I can then give out to whoever needs them, and when they're done, they go back in the pool. And they can be recycled, stripped of their state, and they can be reused back out in your application. So this really helps with performance. So between DB context pooling and compiled queries, I have taken my API performance. I've improved my API performance by 40 to 45% using just these two capabilities of Entity Framework Core. And these aren't even three. These are all two. These were all back in 2.1 and 2.2. So if any developers in here know what this is, it's basically, this is how you add the DB context to the DI container. You just say add DB context on the services. And to do DB context pooling, you just say add DB context pool. And it's as simple as that. And you get DB context pooling right away. Yes? So it goes back to my soapbox. These DB contexts should only be used with small units of work. So if you're using DB context for a long length of time to cache and keep track of changes oh, that's a whole different, I have a whole different talk about caching inside of .NET framework applications. Come talk to me and I'll point you to some resources on that. Yeah. That's an interesting question. That right now, you get 32 when you initially create. And I have not found where I can call and get different instances where I can say, create 150 of these.
So if you had multiple units of work, and you're using, how do you keep track of how many instances you have available?
It takes care of that behind the scenes. So that's all part of the management of EF Core.
So it scales up and goes to exhaustion, which will create more if you go over 32, or do you get like full exhaustion?
For this, I have tried to reach out to the EF Core. I haven't gotten an answer from the EF Core team about this. All I find, I can hit this with 1 million users a second, and 32 is all I see. So I'm trying to dig into that and figure that out. Right now, I can't figure out a way to increase or decrease the number of instances in the pool. So I think we're almost out of time. I always say be nice to your DBA, but you're mostly DBAs. So I love my DBAs. So much so that this is my third past summit. And as a wrap up, if anyone wants to ask me questions, I'm free out here, or I'll walk out after the talk in the hall and we can chat out there. Do session evaluations. Even if you didn't like my talk, please send evaluation. We're always looking for that data to make our event better. And then there's my Twitter handle, and there's my email address if people want to get hold of me. So thank you very much. Have a great rest of the summit, and see you next year in Houston.